Jason Rogers, good to see you, my friend.
Garth, it's good to see you too. I'm happy to see you, my friend.
What is the most spontaneous thing you've ever done?
Oh my gosh. Most spontaneous thing I've ever done. One time I booked a trip. And this was back in the day of faxes. So a fax came into the work machine. I called the number and I booked the trip. That was most fun. And I just need a vacation. Turns out it was a scam. I didn't lose a ton of money, but I did realize how badly I would need to go on vacation. And it was from that moment I started planning a year off, a trip around the world. And I ended up taking 10 months off on my own at that point, traveling around the world. So no, I did not go on the cruise that I booked that came off that fax machine, but I did see most of the world. So that's the most spontaneous thing I've done.
But now you own a timeshare somewhere.
Yeah, right. I know.
That's amazing. Hey, listen, in this podcast, we're talking about effective communication and moments, opportunities to take advantage of that. And our guest, Bart Egnal, the CEO of the Humphrey Group, he talks about preparing for spontaneity. And I love that you had a spontaneous moment that is now preparing you to prepare better for spontaneous moments, because that's some of the stuff that we talk about. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this episode.
Oh man, Bart is so good. He talks about all levels of communication. We get into what is antidote to AI even in this, and what is a human skill that we need to continue to develop, and how do we develop it? I was blown away by his response to that as well.
Yeah, we talk about storytelling. We talk about his company and who he's had on his own podcast. He's had a Top Gun instructor. He's had someone associated with the New England Patriots. The list goes on and on. But I think our listeners would be interested. We answer the question, was Ted a great leader? So listeners, if you have an answer to that, we'd love to hear from you as you go through this podcast.
And I can't wait for them to hear Bart's response. It is a real gem. It's one of a kind. So should we get into it? What do you think?
Yep. Let's go. Enjoy.
Okay, let's do this.
With Garth and Jason, we dive right in, breaking down Ted's world. Let's begin from AFC, Richmond's field to your day-to-day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn and grow.
Welcome to Season 2 of Lassoing Leadership. I'm your host, Jason Rogers.
And I'm your other host, Garth Nichols. And this is episode 2 of our 9th leadership theme. It's pretty amazing. And we're really looking forward to our special guest that we have with us today. We're recording our 9th sort of deep dive. And this week we are deep diving with a special guest, Bart Egnal, who I know really, really well. And so when we were looking for an expert in effective communication, Bart, you are the first person that I thought of. I actually met Bart when I worked at a different school in Toronto, and at the time I was working with his wonderful wife, Emily. And then we spent some time riding some bikes together for a while, and
we chased a few wheels together.
Yeah, we have, and just chatting about life, careers, and leadership. Bart is the CEO of the Humphrey Group, where his role is to lead and grow the company so that they can help all of their clients communicate as inspiring leaders. His work is to solely focus on teaching leadership communication skills to the clients. And in his LinkedIn profile,
so it must be true. It must be true. He writes, "We firmly believe that every time you speak or write, you have the opportunity to shape beliefs and inspire others to act. Far too often, communication in the workplace and in life is dull, uninspired, or simply useless. Yet there are rare moments when someone is able to reach an audience and shape their thinking. We at the Humphrey Group teach our clients to create more of those moments." So, last podcast I referenced Chip and Dan Heath in their book about let's not leave this to chance. Let's not leave this to luck. That these moments. Let's start to create these moments. What do you think, Jason?
I don't think we leave this introduction to chance or luck. I think we toss it over to Bart and let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about his work and his role. So, Bart, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, gentlemen. And Garth and I, as you mentioned, we go way back, and I feel like this is some karmic payback. You helped my wife find a job when we moved to Vancouver, and
And so I was powerless to resist your invitation to come on this pod. But no, in all seriousness, great to be with you both. And, as passionate connoisseurs of leadership, I've listened to your show. I know Garth, you run cohorts. So your journey in leadership has been one I've followed from afar, and nice to be up close. And yes, there is some truth to my LinkedIn profile. I own and lead the Humphrey Group. So we're a company that's solely focused on leadership communication. We do work around the world. And what does that mean? It means we think the skills you need to influence, to persuade, to inspire are not innate. They're ones that you learn. And even though everyone has their own authentic approach that they should embrace, there are some commonalities that you need to be taught. And so we're in the business of teaching those skills and helping people master them. And we do that. We work with people in a one-on-one capacity. The bulk of our work is group training. And then we also license our content to organizations around the world. If you are in a large Fortune 500 company in North America, chances are your company has probably used us. We have a great client list, or government as well. So yeah, it's great to be on here. I love this stuff. I wrote a book on it. I do a podcast on it. So I always appreciate the chance to talk leadership communication. And I know, we talked in the prep for this. I have some thoughts at some point we've got to get into on, was Ted Lasso really an effective leader in how he communicates? It's, I love the show, but that's a question we could delve into.
Amazing. So before we get into that and so much more, I want to remind our listeners, submit your questions to lassoingleadership@gmail.com or through LinkedIn, Spotify, Instagram, or just slip into our DMs or bump into us in the hallway. And we'll be happy to pass them along to Bart or take them on ourselves in episode 3 of this triad.
Yeah. All right. Bart, I love that question about Ted. We're going to hold off on it for a second because I want to dive right in with a nice big softball. Who was one of your favorite guests that you've had on your podcast, the Inspire podcast, which we will link to in our show notes?
Well, you guys haven't come on the podcast yet, so I can't say you as a team, as a tag team. But I would say I've had a lot of guests, and they kind of fit into 3 categories. One is I have people from my own company who come on, and so they talk about what we do in in the practice of teaching leadership communication. The second is I have my clients come on, and they kind of always have interesting perspectives on how they're bringing leadership communication into their workplace. And then third, I just have like an eclectic cast of characters. And so for me, I think those are some of the most interesting people, because they're not in the business of leadership, and they're not professional leaders per se. So like just a few that stand out to me. I'll name 3 because I can't just pick one. First is I had a guy by the name of Dave Burke on the pod in my first season, and Dave was hopefully I'm getting this wrong, but he was the only person who became a Top Gun instructor. And then he flew. He was like one of the first people from the Marines, I think. Hopefully I'm getting this right, to fly this stealth fighter that they have. And so and then he retired from the military. Now he's in the business of taking principles from leadership practice and teaching them. So it was really fascinating having, and he works for a company started by this guy, Jocko Willink, who wrote Extreme Ownership. You may have heard, that's kind of a more famous book. So it's really fascinating hearing how you take, concepts where you think of the military is very command and control. And yet in their view, and in his view, the most effective leaders in the military actually are empowering others. So that was kind of a very counterintuitive conversation. Then the second person who was super interesting was a guy named Mike Lombardi. And Mike was the assistant general manager of the New England Patriots, and during the time that Brady was on the team. And so it's just really interesting hearing his views on leadership and culture, and how in the NFL, so many teams get it wrong in terms of their ability to lead, and the best teams construct with that intention to lead. And then the last was the guy was Tony Fratto. He was the deputy White House press secretary some presidencies ago, and just talking about how the microphone in politics has changed so dramatically. So 3 radically different people in terms of their walks of life, but for whom the through line was that communication, leadership were fundamental in different ways to the success of the industries and organizations that they operate in. And I think, what I took away from them is, even people who are not thinking about leadership communication with intention recognize that their success really depends on it. And they all had they had invested time and energy into thinking about how to do it right. So I know you asked for one guest, but those three stand out.
Hey, Bart, just nobody ever listens to this podcast, so you can feel free to say whatever you want. What did the New England assistant GM think of Belichick? Truly.
He loved him. He really believed in, he said, Belichick has total clarity of conviction, he says, and he communicates that day in and day out. And he says one of the most powerful things in the NFL is that you have so many voices outside in the media, in the press, from the fans, chirping away and telling people what to do. And he says, one of Belichick's great strengths is he has total disregard for it. He just does not care whatsoever.
Yeah.
And he actually says, because he does a podcast called the GM Shuffle, which is how I first kind of got connected with him. And he says, one of the big challenges is that the owners listen to these people, and the owners then impacts their decision making. And so, one of the things he talks about is that Robert Kraft, who owns the Patriots, began listening too much to people who said that, Belichick, that was the architect of the success, and that Kraft had nothing to do with it. And so he kind of became increasingly resentful that, Belichick was getting all the credit, and that was at the heart of his decision to get rid of him and then launch this. You may have seen that there was a Netflix or a Apple TV series about the Patriots, which kind of brushed aside Belichick's contributions and focused on the Kraft. So it is fascinating. He had a lot of respect for Belichick and for Brady. And his view was it was a challenging partnership that ultimately brought out the best in them.
That's amazing. So I have two questions here for you, Bart, around communication. First one's pretty broad, and then I'll get more specific for some of our listeners. So if you're just to distill it down, what are three things that leaders can do to be, truly effective communicators? What's the first advice you'd give to a leader stepping into a role?
Well, even before I answer that, I think it's important that we define the term leader. And, I'm sure, you've got people listening, and maybe just give me a sense. Is it mostly from the education business or sector, we should say?
We find that it's about probably 70-30, Bart. We've got 70% education, 30% business sector listeners.
So I think this definition of leadership that I'll put forth applies to both, but it's particularly relevant in education, where you have these flat structures, right? Where so many people are essentially kind of, you close the door of the classroom and you are in charge. I think the first thing to think about is that my definition of leader is not linked to title. It's not linked to people management, and it's not linked to a place in an org chart. We all know people who sit at the top of the org chart who we would not describe as leaders, right? And we all know people who are non-authoritative leaders in the organization. So the first thing to keep in mind is that your ability to lead is really a function of your ability to inspire others to act, and not because you direct them to act and can compel them to act, but because they have conviction that you can act. And I know in the my wife, as Garth, as you know, been a teacher for a long time. She switched to Pilates now, but she, had a long career in education. And, in education, and particularly in the public system, in the private system, there is perhaps the threat of an end of career that does not exist in the public system. But even in the public and private, and I would say in the private sector, people will pay lip service if they don't fundamentally believe in the action that you want them to take. What real change and real action comes from is shaping convictions and beliefs. So I think the first point is you need to think about leadership through the lens of influence, persuasion, and inspiration. The second point I'd say is that this does not happen, the ability to inspire, the ability to persuade does not just happen like spontaneously. The people who are most effective in the moment have worked ahead of that moment to be ready. Now, it's almost counterintuitive. To be spontaneous, you must be prepared. And so that kind of preparation, you have to work to be supernatural. You have to work unnaturally hard ahead of time. And And so that's, what kind of preparation? It's really about preparing your ideas. You don't want to have a script that you read, but you want to have clarity of thinking and clarity of conviction. And that leads me to my last point, which is you could think of it as move from information to inspiration. Too many people are concerned with the effective transfer of information. Let me tell you what I know. Let's go over this. Here's the 5 strategies, blah, 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 blah. Instead of, what do I want? What do I believe? What do I feel? What do I want my audience to believe? And really, if they believe that, it will inspire them to act. So those would be the 3 points I'd lead with.
Okay, the follow-up I have, Bart, and that, by the way, there's a lot in there to unpack. I look forward to getting further into it. I mean, so the scenario I want to run through is you are a new principal of a school, or you're, a new leader in a business. If you're having your first staff meeting, you're about to walk into that room and you've got, 2 or 3 minutes, and you pick up the phone, you call your friend Bart and you say, hey, listen, Bart, I'm about to go in there. Right. What is a salient advice you're going to give me to set me up for success in that first meeting? We only got a few minutes to do this. So what do you think?
I'm not going to tell you what to say. So what I do instead is ask you some questions that help you define what to say. The first question you should ask yourself in any situation like that is, what action do I want to inspire? Right? That is the first question. Now, if this is your first day as a principal, and this is your first meeting with the staff, and maybe you're new to the school. Let's even take it a step further. You're new to the school, right? And so you've been brought in with a mandate, for example, to, improve the quality of teaching or whatever, right? So maybe the action you want to inspire is to create openness and readiness to embrace new ways of thinking, for sake of argument. So then once you have your action that you want to inspire, then the next thing you want to do is you want to say, all right, what belief do you want this audience to leave with that if they have it, will cause them to be ready for that action? And so so that's kind of the second piece that, define that there. So those are, I would say if you can get those 2 things, everything else is, supportive of that. How you open should lead into that. The supporting points you choose should go with that. The tone, the delivery. But that's really at the heart. What action do you want to inspire, and what belief do you want to leave them with?
Thank you.
That's amazing. Thanks, Bart. So
sure.
We have some aspiring leaders who listen to our podcast, and they're in education, and it's not uncommon to be really busy and miss some moments. And I know that you believe, and you've spoken about this, you've written about this, every moment is a chance to inspire, to connect, and lead. Can you tell me more about that as a mindset for leaders, that every moment is an opportunity?
Yes. And that could sound daunting, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have every moment. I've got to nail every moment. Okay, let's just start by saying, what I say to my clients is, yes, every interaction is a moment and an opportunity. But not all opportunities are of the same magnitude or significance, right? Because sometimes you get people who take it to the extreme where they're like, you run into someone at the water cooler and they're like, I want to leave you with the message that we have to transform this school. And the guy's like, I just want to get some water. It's a step away. Yeah. So I think you have to think about every moment, but then you have to think about which are the right moments. Where is the audience ready and able to take it? And then you have to also allocate your own time and energy, right? You have to say, is this a moment to build, like, what is the significance and scope of this moment? Maybe it's just in this moment, it's to build a slightly stronger relationship. Maybe that is that first day, and that is a command performance. So I think take the pressure off yourself if you're a new leader and you're thinking, I got to be capital L lead in every situation. But what I work with my clients, and I say, look, let's say, you're getting ready for your week. And whether it's Sunday night or Monday morning, you're on your way to your school or your job, really reflect and say, all right, this week, what are the 1 or 2 opportunities of greatest significance that I can identify? Because there'll be some that you won't, but you can at least be. And in some ways, even more importantly, who are the audiences I really want to reach this week? Because you won't often know where those audiences will be, but you want to, if you think about those 2 things, then you can begin to go through the process of preparation. And not even necessarily, initially when you prep, you train your brain, you should be writing it down. Ultimately, you'll write down your head. But you want to think, what are the, if I want to move this audience, I want to be at that opportunity. Okay, maybe I've got 3 audiences, right? I got to move. I've got some faculty who are just resistant to embracing a new use of technology. And then I have one board member who is pushing us to cut costs when we really should be investing in the business. And then lastly, I have a parent council that is dissatisfied with something, right? So you're thinking, these are my 3 audiences. Okay, with each one, what is the key? What is the action I want to inspire in them? And then what's the idea I want to leave them with? Now, do I then have an opportunity with each of them? Maybe I have an opportunity with those teachers, then maybe I have an opportunity with the council. I'm not going to see the board member. So you really kind of want to think about it through that lens of who do I need to move and how do I want to get there?
Love it.
So Bart, we started this series looking at every Ted Lasso episode.
Wow.
Okay, so we did them all. We've strayed a little bit. Now we kind of are into these leadership themes. So I like to bring it back to Ted.
You've lost your way, Jason.
We like to bring it back to Ted just a little bit.
Be a goldfish. Be a goldfish.
Yeah, you've got it. So this is a point. So Ted loves metaphors,
right?
And especially sports ones. Where is the place for that kind of storytelling in leadership? Or sometimes I wonder, does it muddy the waters for the followers? What's your take on metaphors in leadership?
Well, they can be great. I mean, they can be absolutely great. We, in fact, have built and are building, we have a program on storytelling for leaders, and we're building a more robust one because the storytelling skill has become an increasingly critical one. People are more resistant to what I would call push influence. They're like, don't sell me.
Yeah.
It's a big change in the last day. But tell me a story and I'll come to that conclusion. So I definitely think storytelling and metaphor have become increasingly compelling and important tools in the leadership communication toolbox, if used correctly, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, you still should go through that process, right, of saying, who is my audience? What do I want to inspire them to do? What belief do I want to leave them with? Before you select the story or the metaphor. Where those things are ineffective, you'll hear someone stand up at, let's say you've got that first staff meeting, right, that you're talking about. Let me tell you this long story about my journey into teaching and when I discovered, my passion for education and what it meant for me. And then they're like, okay, so now let's look at the year ahead, right? Total decoupling of the story. So we often know that storytelling is powerful, but for leaders, they have to be connected to the intention that you want to have. And, metaphors can also, same thing, some people are, like you mentioned, sports metaphors. I mean, some people really overuse them, right? Where you're like, or even mix them, it's first and goal. And we got to, swing for the fences. And, and it's like, is your audience a sports audience? Does that resonate with them? So are you choosing your metaphor because it resonates with you? Or are you choosing your metaphor because it's going to be impactful for your audience? And so I think that's a good example. Like, they can be good, they can be effective, but they have to be used with intention. And I think, with Ted, he's fun to listen to, right? Because of these metaphors. And sometimes you get one like the goldfish one, which is great. I mean, it's like in sport, you do have to put those mistakes behind you and move forward. So that would be a compelling metaphor. But in other cases, the audience with Ted is like, what is the point of the story? Or where is the story going? Right. And they're like, they're at a loss for it. So, and I think, with Ted, that, when you watch him, he has such a great desire to connect with people. And he does effectively. And I think he was the antidote to the kind of bureaucratic, militant coach who just drove for performance and didn't care about the people. At the same time, he lacked any sort of cohesive clarity in what he was saying. It's like, what are you trying to do? Like, even in that last season, do you even want the team to win? It doesn't even matter to you if it wins. And I think that was it. There's the difference between what works for an audience watching a TV show and, you know, what works in an organization. You know, back to Mike Lombardi, right? Where it's, he talks about, you know, what Belichick did well was he had clarity around, like, this is how we play. This is what the team is going to do. And, you know, it was almost militant in that do your job was his slogan, right? But that was based on the fact that they had total role clarity and organizational cohesion and purpose around this is how we play and this is how we win. So I think, you know, metaphor stories, tremendously powerful when used with intention.
So Bart, let's get to that question. And I'm gonna bring some context to it. Was Ted a great leader through the lens of effective communication? Because I think of those moments, especially when he's talking to the press, and he's nickname like he's nicknames, right. and he uses these American slang. Right. Like there is an element of like, we're going to be friends. We are in this together. There's so many different parts to Ted's job. So what's your answer? Was Ted a great leader?
I would say Ted was a great person, but not a great leader.
Ooh, let's unpack that, Bart.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think, you know, it's fantasy, right? So we have to say, you know, there, you know, and the fantasy ends the right way in the show, right? They come up and rise. But, you know, I think in my view, the communication part from a leadership standpoint that Ted adopted would not be effective in the real world at all. You know, I think that he, you know, there are a couple things. His strengths were human connection, empathy, care, and a willingness to adopt unorthodox ideas, right?
Yep.
However, you know, he really had little interest in, I would say, knowing his audience. In, you know, like, I mean, you look at his total disinterest in kind of adopting the approach of English football, right? Versus, you know, he kind of stays like the, you know, the polite but ugly American, if you will. And, you know, very much lacked a clarity of intention and purpose as a team, you know, of how they were going to win and what each person's role was. And you know, it is more, he made it more of a family than the business, you know, in terms of,
nice.
And I think that was, you know, a beautiful thing, particularly when Ted Lasso came out in the time that we were in, right? Kind of just the COVID period where people wanted like a more humanistic workplace. There was a big shift, and I see it in the corporate world, from, you know, to caring for people, right? That people wanted that. And so I think Ted was an embodiment of what we were all seeking, which was a more humanistic leadership and workplace. And so I think he met that kind of existential need. But I mean, you know, he's baffling, right? If you were on that team, you would say, what are we doing here? Like, what is going on here? You know, what are you trying? Like, what is my part in this? Like, oh, we're just going to, I mean, just like that ridiculous when they shift strategies, and then he's got the string is out there, and, you know, no one really, like, you're like, what the heck is going on, true. You know? And totally so, true. You know, I contrast, have you guys seen, you know, Welcome to Wrexham?
Oh, just talked about it in our last episode, in fact.
It's great. I mean, it's a great doc. You know, it's fun. It's kind of like it's an interesting contrast, right, with Ted Lasso, but it's real. And I mean, real as a doc can get, but but, you know, I think their coach is a really fascinating example, right, of someone who brings, you know, some of the care, but you can see he is like laser focused on what they need to do.
There's one episode where they count the number of F-bombs.
Yes, I love it. But he only swears during games. Did you notice that?
Yes.
The F-bombs only, it's like he switches into swearing mode, right? You know? So, you know, it is, you know, back to Ted, I think that I would encourage leaders to see the power of his empathy, his humanistic approach, but I would not expect that Ted would have gotten many results. And, you know, the interesting thing is that organization, you know, even the owner, she didn't buy the team to win, right? She bought it to stick it to her ex-husband. And he provided a caring model that was a contrast to Rupert. And he provided support and care to her, right, as well. Yeah. And so the whole organization was less, and then of course, because it's TV, they happen to win anyways.
You know, something struck me there, Bart, where you said he wasn't interested in getting to know his audience. What I noticed about Ted was he was trying to make sure that his audience knew him.
Totally.
Right. And then buy into me. Sorry, Jason, you go ahead.
No. That was brilliant. And you've almost convinced me, Bart. We got a little ways to go. Maybe we'll take it off air. But I think I have one last question I need to ask you from an educator's standpoint. Now, it was about the mid-2000s. I was invited to speak on a panel about the future skills of the future.
Okay.
And the question was, what is the one skill that students will need to be successful in the future? This was in the era of, Web 1.0, basically. Social media was just emerging. And I said communication is number one. I think the ability to influence and inspire. Now, in this day and age of AI, we're 15 years later, we're faced with a lot of technology that wasn't there. Would you support my argument in the fact that communication is the one human skill that we can hang on to that is going to be the change maker between those who perhaps succeed and those who might not have as much success? Is that still the skill?
I think it's even more so the skill now. I mean, there was a great book I read probably back when you were on that panel called Free by Chris Anderson, the former head of Wired magazine. And he talked about the fact that for the first time, the web had made things truly free. Like the marginal cost of adding another Gmail account was so close to zero as to be virtually free. And so instead of just being like buy one, get one free, you can literally have something free. And so what he said was, when you have new economies of abundance, for example, music had become basically free. It created new economies of scarcity. Ticket prices. Look at Taylor. We've got Taylor Swift this week in Toronto. Astronomical ticket price. I mean, you could listen to every album of Taylor's for pennies at most on Spotify. And so when you look at the rise of content, right, and we are awash in content, the human and AI generated content, the human element of thinking of, an idea has become even more valuable. And your ability to communicate those ideas is foundational to what differentiates you. And so I do think that skill is universal. I mean, versus like I remember, 10 years ago, teacher, send your kid to Code Ninjas and they'll have a well-paid job for life. Well, maybe not, but communication is foundational. And I work with people across all industries, banking, finance, telecom, oil and gas, like human, HR, human capital, education, government. Every time people advance, it is because of their ability to translate and explain the knowledge they have into ideas that inspire. And no one seems to have created an AI yet to do that.
It's amazing. This is such great stuff. Communication is a skill because we're in an abundance of content. So how do you inspire and get people to act on that inspiration is what is scarce. Love it, Bart.
Yeah, hey, and in the end, we're in the business, whether you're teaching, you're leading teachers, you're running a company, you aspire to lead. Your success is really going to be about, can you move people, right? Can you get them to believe in you? Can you get them to act? Can you bring them together? This is the foundational challenge and opportunity. And I do think the last thing I'll say is, even though this is a new world with technology and demands on leaders, there's never been a greater opportunity to be an authentic leader who inspires people. It used to be 20 years ago, there was like one size of leader, and it was usually a guy, it was usually white, it was usually old, right? Like the Jack Welch equivalent. And now there is an embrace of all sorts of types of leader. They look different, they sound different, and they are truly authentic. So I think that's an amazing thing to think about. You can be yourself and lead. And I think audiences, they punish leaders they're not inspired by. They leave for other jobs more quickly. They'll tell you if they don't like. But the flip side is they want to be inspired. They're looking for people to reach them. And maybe if you combine that Ted Lasso humanistic element with actually a clear message, right? You will inspire and people will follow you. And I think that is the promise of what exists today. There's never been a more exciting time to go forth and inspire. So yeah, I think it's awesome that you guys are doing this series, and hopefully this is one more tool in the toolkit for your listeners.
Amazing. Bart, where can our listeners find your work?
Yeah, well, we do have. I do a podcast. In fact, I should have answered. I should have answered earlier. The ultimate guest I've had on is the one, the only Garth Nichols.
Yeah.
You know, I just couldn't. I couldn't get you right. But yes, Garth has been on the Inspire podcast. Jason will have you on sometime too. So I'm going into season 7. It's on all the platforms. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And, you know, if you like what we're talking about, the Humphrey Group does a free, content blog. We run free webinars on these topics. You want to improve your skills, go to our website, thehumphreygroup.com, sign up. I have another company called the Niagara Institute that's more broad-based leadership. We produce a lot of content there. So I encourage you to sign up for that and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Bart, this was unbelievable. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And just before I go, I want to remind our listeners, we are taking questions. If this doesn't inspire a question or two, I don't know what will. So please reach out to us and let us help you along your leadership journey.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to subscribe, like, and tell your friends. And Bart, can you do the honors of taking us home?
Until next time, keep leading the Lasso way.
Awesome.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Step up to the mic. It's time to play. Lassoing leadership every day. From the pitch to the boardroom, lessons call to mind. Keep leading the Lasso way. You'll find we've got heart, we've got soul, and humor too. Exploring how Ted shows what leaders should do. With Garth and Jason, we dive right in, breaking down Ted's world. Let's begin from AFC, Richmond's Field to your day-to-day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the Lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn.